Around a year ago, we had a new neighbor move into the vacant property next door. We lived in a quiet neighborhood, mainly filled with families and a few retirees. It was just me and my wife, Kate. We had lived there for the last 3 years after getting married. The house next door had been empty since we moved here. One morning, we noticed the moving van pull outside the house before we went to work. There was a woman standing in the driveway, directing the various removal people, carrying boxes. She was possibly 40 years old, slim build with shoulder-length brown hair. Me and my wife went over to say hello and introduce ourselves. We asked her whether she was moving here with her family. She responded stating that it was just her and her name was Melissa. She didn't seem like much of a social person, and after some awkward exchanges, we both left her to get moved in and went to work. We didn't really see her much as we both worked long hours, but it did become apparent that she didn't leave the house much. We had only seen her a handful of times since she moved in. That was until last week. I went out to my backyard after getting back from work to get some tools out of my storage shed. I grabbed my toolkit as I had to put some shelving up. As I shut the door, something caught my eye. It was something shiny, catching the evening sunset from my neighbor's upstairs window. I gazed up. The curtain was half closed, but still exposing something that was hanging from the ceiling. I adjusted my eyes. It was Melissa. The color had drained from her pale arms and legs. It was her anklet that was catching the sun as her lifeless body swayed. I was rooted to the spot, took a large gulp as my eyes watered in shock. Kate came out the back door after seeing my expression. She asked what was wrong. She repeated herself after I didn't respond. I stuttered the words while pointing up. "The neighbor." She turned and looked up. The gasp that came from her now hand-covered mouth was as if the air had been sucked from her lungs. I composed myself for a second and said, "We need to call the police." We rushed inside. I grabbed my phone and dialed, my finger trembling with every number. I explained what we had seen, and the operator told me that the police were on their way and to stay in the house. We waited by the window for 15 minutes until we saw the glow of blue flashing lights come up the road. We met the officers outside Melissa's house. They banged on the door as we stood at the end of the driveway. Their knocks were met by nothing. They tried again while shouting, "Police, open up!" Kate, with tears running down her face, shouted over, "You need to get in and help her." As the two officers turned round to us, the door slowly opened. Melissa appeared in the doorway. One of the officers apologized and said there was a report of a disturbance at this property. She told them she was asleep, and that's why she didn't answer straight away. We were both stood, eyes wide, staring at her, thinking that this wasn't possible. We both had seen her. She was dead up there. It was definitely her. Our breathing now erratic and shallow. The officers asked whether they could come in and have a look around. She said that it was fine while pushing the door fully open. They disappeared into the house for 10 minutes as we waited, confused and questioning what we had seen. As they came out, they apologized to her again, while wishing her a good evening. The two cops came over to us, Kate said, and we definitely saw her or someone dead up there. One officer said that they checked every room. There was nothing out of the ordinary. As they went back into the car, I shouted over to Melissa that we were sorry, and we must have made a mistake. She gazed over to us, her face expressionless as she closed the door. We walked back to the house in disbelief, and went back to the backyard. We both looked up. Melissa was stood in the same window. She stared at us both. A sinister smile grew on her face as she slowly pulled the curtain closed. We went back inside, still freaked out on what we had experienced. Kate was still really upset, but relieved that Melissa was okay. I still couldn't make sense of it, my mind still going back to what I had seen in the window. We went to bed exhausted. Kate fell asleep almost immediately, but me? No, I wasn't sleeping anytime soon. I heard a noise coming from outside. I checked my phone. It was 1:30. I slowly got out of bed and made my way to the window. I peered through the edge of our curtains. In the middle of her backyard, Melissa stood motionless. Her head suddenly turned up to our window. I quickly pulled the curtain back. My heart was starting to race as I went to look again a second later. She was gone. I got back into bed and tried my best to think rationally about the night's events. I did eventually sleep. We woke the next morning. I didn't say anything to Kate about what I had seen. She had gone through enough that night already. We went off to work still trying to pretend last night didn't happen. I arrived home later that evening. Kate finished work a couple of hours earlier than me. I went in and called out for her, but I was met by silence. This was strange. She would have messaged me if she went out and her car was still on the driveway. I had worked late and she should have been home hours ago. I checked all of the rooms. As I was heading back downstairs, she came through the front door. I said, "Where were you?" She replied, "I went to see Melissa. You're home early." I looked at her confused. "Kate, it's 7 o'clock. I got held up at the office." She seemed taken back. "I went over there at 5. We only had a quick chat about what happened, and I wanted to check if she was okay." I said that she must have lost track of time and asked how Melissa was. Kate said she was fine. It was just a misunderstanding. I was just glad that this wasn't going to be awkward going forward. The next few days were normal, as if nothing had happened. Last night things started getting weird. We had both gone out after work to a restaurant. Around halfway through our meal, we got notifications from our video doorbell. When I opened it, Melissa was stood on our porch. Her face bruised, blood coming from her nose and mouth. There was a red, swollen indent around her neck. She was repeating in a hushed voice, "Help, please, help me." Her eyes darted from side to side. Me and Kate looked at each other in terror as we left some cash on the table and rushed out to the car. We left the feed going as we drove. Suddenly Kate, in a panic, said, "What the fuck?" I said, "What?" She didn't answer. "Kate, what is it?" I pulled the car over. We both looked at the feed. There were 2 figures stood behind Melissa at the end of our driveway. They walked slowly forward towards her. As Melissa turned around, she begged them to stay away. I didn't realize at first, but as they came closer to the camera, I recognized both of them. They looked exactly like Kate and the other Melissa, but it obviously wasn't them. Kate was sat next to me, now crying hysterically, and Melissa was still there on the ground, begging, seemingly for her life. The video stopped. The word "streaming error" flashed onto the now dark screen. I said, "We can't go back there." Kate agreed, and we checked into a hotel the other side of town. We don't know what to do now. We need to go home eventually. We wanted to check on Melissa, but the fear we both have is stopping us. We're both deciding whether to go back later today. The video has not gone back on since.